My name is Avery Collins, and I never expected to find myself in a war with my dead husband's brother. But here I am, staring down the barrel of a family feud that threatens to tear apart everything I've worked so hard to preserve. The doorbell rang, shattering the peaceful quiet of my Saturday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something, call it instinct or just plain curiosity, made me set down my book and make my way to the front door. I wish I hadn't. There he stood, Griffin Collins, my late husband Ethan's younger brother. His smile was as charming as ever, but there was a glint in his eye that made my skin crawl. "Avery, darling. It's been far too long," he exclaimed, stepping forward as if to embrace me. I took a step back, my hand still on the doorknob. "Griffin, what are you doing here?" He feigned hurt, placing a hand over his heart. Can a man visit his beloved sister-in-law? Especially after such a tragedy. I bit back a retort. Ethan had been gone for 6 months, and this was the first I'd heard from Griffin. "Of course," I said instead, forcing a smile. "Please come in." As I led him to the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was inviting a fox into the henhouse. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. "Be careful of Griffin, Avery. He's got a heart of gold, but it's fool's gold." Griffin settled into Ethan's favorite armchair, and I had to resist the urge to tell him to move. Instead, I perched on the edge of the sofa, my back straight as a board. "So, Griffin, what brings you by after all this time?" He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Well, Avery, I've been doing some thinking. About family, about legacy, about what's fair." My stomach dropped. "Here it comes," I thought. "I think it's time we discussed Ethan's estate," Griffin continued, his voice smooth as silk. "I believe there are some discrepancies that need to be addressed." I blinked, momentarily stunned. Discrepancies? "Griffin, everything was settled months ago. The will was clear." "Was it?" He interrupted, his charm slipping for a moment to reveal something harder underneath. "I find it hard to believe that my dear brother would leave everything to you, Avery. We were blood after all." I stood up, anger rising in my chest. "Ethan and I were married for 30 years, Griffin. We built a life together. A life you were rarely part of, I might add." Griffin rose as well, his height allowing him to tower over me. Now, Avery, let's not get emotional. I'm simply suggesting we take another look at things. For the sake of family." "The answer is no, Griffin," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "There's nothing to discuss. I think you should leave." For a moment I thought he might argue, but then that charming smile slid back into place. Of course. I can see you need time to think this over. But mark my words, Avery, this isn't over." As I showed him to the door, he turned back, his eyes cold despite his smile. "You'll regret this, Avery. One way or another, I'll get what's rightfully mine." The door closed behind him with a final sounding click, and I leaned against it, my heart pounding. I knew, deep in my bones, that this was just the beginning. Griffin wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, or until I stopped him. As I made my way back to the living room, my eyes fell on a photo of Ethan and me on our last anniversary. "Oh, Ethan," I whispered, "what am I going to do?" Little did I know, the answer to that question would lead me down a path I never could have imagined, a path of secrets, lies, and a battle for the very legacy Ethan left behind. The attic was stuffy, dust motes dancing in the thin beams of sunlight that snuck through the small window. I sneezed as I pulled another box from the stack, the label faded but still legible. "Ethan's Papers, 2010 to 2015. My encounter with Griffin had left me shaken, but it also ignited a fire in me. If he thought there was more to Ethan's estate, maybe there was. And I was determined to find it before he did. I'd been at it for hours, sifting through old tax returns, bank statements, and what seemed like endless junk mail. Just as I was about to call it quits, a thick manila envelope caught my eye. It was unmarked, tucked between two folders. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, investment reports, offshore account statements, and a handwritten letter from Ethan. My dearest Avery, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've found what I've kept hidden for so long. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but I needed to protect us from Griffin, from the vultures of the world. This fortune is for you, to use as you see fit. But be careful. Griffin has always suspected, and he'll stop at nothing to get his hands on it. I sat back, stunned. The document showed a fortune far beyond anything I'd imagined. Ethan had built an empire in secret, and now it was mine to protect. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Found any buried treasure yet? Avery? Better share the wealth before things get ugly. My blood ran cold. How could Griffin know? I scrambled to gather the papers, my mind racing. I needed to secure these documents, to protect this legacy Ethan had left me. Just then, the doorbell rang, startling me so badly I dropped the envelope, papers scattering across the attic floor. Heart pounding, I made my way downstairs. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Hendricks, my elderly neighbor, looking distressed. I opened the door cautiously. "Avery, dear," she said, wringing her hands. "I hate to bother you, but I've just had the most unsettling conversation with your brother-in-law in the supermarket." My stomach dropped. "Griffin? What did he say?" Mrs. Hendricks looked uncomfortable. "Well, he was asking all sorts of questions about you and Ethan, insinuating things. It wasn't right, the way he was talking. I thought you should know." I thanked her, my mind whirling. Griffin was making moves, trying to turn the community against me. I needed to act fast. Back inside, I returned to the attic, gathering the scattered papers with new urgency. As I did, a small business card fell from one of the folders. It read, "Jonah Reeves, attorney at law." Jonah, my old friend. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was him. I reached for my phone, then hesitated. What if Griffin had somehow tapped my line? Paranoia was setting in, but I couldn't take any chances. I'd have to see Jonah in person. As I made my way back downstairs, clutching the envelope of secrets to my chest, another text came through. "TikTok, Avery. Time's running out." I squared my shoulders, a plan forming in my mind. Griffin thought he could intimidate me, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. I was Avery Collins, and I would fight with everything I had to protect what was mine. Tomorrow, I'd see Jonah. We'd figure out how to secure these assets, how to stay one step ahead of Griffin. But tonight, I had work to do. I needed to go through every scrap of paper, every account statement, and make sure I understood exactly what I was dealing with. As I settled in for a long night of research, I couldn't help but smile grimly. Griffin wanted a war? Well, he was about to get one. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped into Jonah's law office. The familiar scent of old books and coffee greeted me, a comforting contrast to the anxiety churning in my stomach. Jonah looked up from his desk, his eyes widening in surprise. "Avery, what brings you here?" I closed the door behind me, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "I need your help, Jonah. It's about Ethan's estate. And Griffin." Jonah's expression darkened. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down. Tell me everything." For the next hour, I poured out the whole story. Griffin's visit, the hidden fortune, the threatening messages. Jonah listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with each revelation. "This is serious, Avery," he said when I finished. "We need to act fast to secure those assets." And as for Griffin, he trailed off, his eyes narrowing. "I think it's time we did some digging of our own." Over the next few days, Jonah and I worked tirelessly. We set up new accounts, transferred funds, and created a paper trail that would be nearly impossible for Griffin to trace. But it was what Jonah uncovered about Griffin that truly shocked me. "Look at this," Jonah said, spreading out a series of documents on his desk. "Griffin's been involved in at least 3 fraudulent business ventures in the last decade. He's left a trail of angry investors and lawsuits behind him." I leaned in, scanning the papers. But how has he gotten away with it? Jonah's expression was grim. Charm, mostly, and a knack for disappearing just before things fall apart. But his luck's running out. His last venture collapsed spectacularly, and he's drowning in debt. That's why he's after Ethan's money. It's his last hope. The pieces were falling into place. So, what do? We gather evidence, Jonah replied, his eyes glinting with determination. Every shady deal, every angry investor. We build a case so strong that Griffin won't know what hit him. As we worked, Griffin's harassment intensified. Ominous notes appeared in my mailbox. I'd catch glimpses of him watching me in town. But each threat only strengthened my resolve. One evening, as I was leaving Jonah's office, I ran into Sarah, an old friend from my book club. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she quickly looked away. "Sarah?" I called out. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then turned back. "Oh, Avery, I don't know what to believe anymore. Griffin's been saying such terrible things about you. About how you manipulated Ethan, how you're hiding money that should go to charity." My heart sank. So this was Griffin's game. Turn the community against me. I took a deep breath. "Sarah, none of that is true. Griffin is trying to steal Ethan's legacy. I can prove it." Sarah looked uncertain, but she nodded. "I want to believe you, Avery. You've always been a good friend." As she walked away, I felt a mix of anger and determination. Griffin was playing dirty, but I wouldn't stoop to his level. I'd fight with the truth. Back in Jonah's office, I shared what had happened. He nodded grimly. "It's a classic tactic. Isolate the target, make them vulnerable. But we're not going to let that happen." He pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let's make a list of everyone in town who might be willing to vouch for your character. We'll need allies in this fight." As we worked late into the night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Griffin thought he had me cornered, but he'd underestimated me. With Jonah by my side and the truth as our weapon, we were building a case that would not only protect Ethan's legacy, but expose Griffin for the fraud he truly was. The battle lines were drawn. Now it was time to fight back. The whispers followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, the post office, even during my morning walks. Sidelong glances, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. Griffin's smear campaign was in full swing, and I could feel the community's trust in me eroding with each passing day. "Did you hear? Avery's been embezzling from Ethan's charity fund for years." I always thought she seemed too good to be true. Poor Ethan must be rolling in his grave. The lies stung, each one a dagger to my heart. But I refused to let them break me. Instead, I channeled my pain into determination, working tirelessly with Jonah to build our case against Griffin. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, I bumped into Tom, the owner of the local hardware store and a longtime friend of Ethan's. "Avery," he said, his voice cold. "I think it's best if you don't come by the store anymore. We don't serve thieves here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Tom, you've known me for 30 years. You can't possibly believe." "Save it," he cut me off. "Griffin showed me the proof. Bank statements, withdrawal slips, all in your handwriting. How could you do this to Ethan's memory?" As Tom walked away, leaving me stunned on the sidewalk, I realized the depths of Griffin's desperation. He was fabricating evidence now, and doing it well enough to fool even those who knew me best. I rushed to Jonah's office, my hands shaking as I recounted what had happened. "This is getting out of hand," Jonah said, his face grim. "We need to move faster. I've been in touch with some of Griffin's former business partners. They're willing to testify about his fraudulent practices, but they're scared. We need to assure them they'll be protected." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "TikTok, Avery. The vultures are circling. Ready to negotiate yet?" I showed Jonah the message, my jaw clenched. "He thinks he's winning." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Let him think that. It'll make our counterattack all the more effective." Over the next few days, we worked around the clock. Jonah coordinated with Griffin's victims, building a network of witnesses willing to speak out. I focused on gathering character references from old friends and colleagues, people who knew the real me and could vouch for my integrity. But Griffin wasn't idle. His attacks escalated. Graffiti appeared on my garage door one morning. "Thief," in angry red letters. Anonymous calls flooded my phone, filled with threats and accusations. The final straw came during the town's annual charity auction. I'd always been a key organizer, But this year, I'd been pointedly uninvited. Curious to see Griffin's next move, I attended anyway, keeping to the shadows at the back of the room. Griffin took the stage, his charm on full display. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "I have a sad announcement to make. It's come to light that a significant amount of money from last year's auction has gone missing. And I'm afraid all evidence points to one person, Avery Collins." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. I felt the weight of accusing stares, saw the disappointment and anger on faces I'd known for years. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear and hurt I'd been carrying transformed into a steely resolve. I stepped out of the shadows, my head held high. "That's a lie, Griffin," I said, my voice ringing clear across the suddenly silent room. "And I can prove it." All eyes turned to me. Griffin's smug expression faltered for a moment before he recovered, plastering on a sympathetic smile. "Avery, dear, this isn't the time or place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the right time and place," I interrupted, walking towards the stage. "You want to talk about missing money? Let's talk about your fraudulent business ventures. Let's talk about the trail of deceived investors you've left in your wake." The room was dead silent now, all attention riveted on the unfolding drama. As I climbed the steps to the stage, I locked eyes with Griffin. His mask of charm had slipped, revealing the desperation beneath. The battle lines were drawn. It was time to expose the truth, once and for all. The tension in Jonah's office was palpable as we pored over the documents spread across his desk. My hands trembled as I picked up a yellowed piece of paper, its edges frayed with age. "This can't be real," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Jonah leaned in, his brow furrowed. "What is it, Avery?" I held up the document, a last will and testament dated just weeks before Ethan's death. "It's a new will, one that leaves everything to Griffin. But Ethan would never." "He didn't," Jonah interrupted, his eyes narrowing as he examined the paper. "This is a forgery, and not a very good one at that. Where did you find this?" It was mixed in with the papers from Ethan's study. I must have overlooked it before. A chill ran down my spine as the implications sank in. Griffin must have planted it there during one of his visits. Jonah's expression hardened. "This is serious, Avery. He's not just spreading rumors anymore. He's committing fraud." As the gravity of the situation settled over us, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Griffin. "Found my surprise yet? Time's running out. Dear sister-in-law. Meet me at the old boathouse tomorrow at noon. Come alone, or everyone sees the will." I showed Jonah the message, my heart racing. He's making his move. Jonah stood up, pacing the room. "This is our chance, Avery. We can catch him red-handed." Over the next few hours, we formulated a plan. Jonah would contact the police and set up surveillance at the boathouse. I would meet Griffin as requested, wearing a hidden microphone to record our conversation. As dawn broke, I found myself standing at the edge of the lake, the old boathouse looming before me. The weight of the microphone beneath my blouse felt like a lifeline. Griffin emerged from the shadows, his usual charm replaced by a barely concealed desperation. "Avery, so glad you could make it. I trust you've had time to consider my offer?" I steeled myself, channeling all the anger and hurt of the past weeks into my voice. "You mean your blackmail attempt? Griffin, this has to stop. That will is a forgery, and we both know it." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Prove it. By the time anyone figures it out, I'll be long gone with my share of Ethan's fortune." "Face it, Avery. You've lost." "Have I?" I countered, reaching into my bag. I pulled out a stack of documents, the real evidence we'd gathered against him. Fraudulent business deals, angry investors, a trail of deceit stretching back years. "Is this really how you want to honor Ethan's memory?" For a moment, Griffin's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. But then his eyes hardened. "You're bluffing. You've got nothing." "Am I?" I pressed. "The police are on their way, Griffin. This is your last chance to come clean, to make things right." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance. Griffin's face paled, his bravado crumbling. "You set me up," he snarled, lunging for the documents in my hand. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a loose board. As I fell, I saw a blur of movement, Jonah, emerging from his hiding place, tackling Griffin to the ground. The next few minutes were a chaos of shouting and flashing lights as the police arrived. As they led Griffin away in handcuffs, I caught his eye. For a moment, I saw not the conniving fraud, but the little brother Ethan had always tried to protect. "It didn't have to be this way," I said softly. Griffin's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Avery. For everything." As the police car drove away, Jonah helped me to my feet. "It's over," he said, squeezing my hand. But as I looked out over the lake, where Ethan and I had spent so many happy summers, I knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would honor Ethan's legacy the way he had always intended. The conference room at the Oak Ridge Country Club buzzed with anticipation. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, my heart pounding beneath my carefully composed exterior. Jonah stood by the door, nodding reassuringly as a group of well-dressed men and women filed in, taking their seats around the table. These weren't real investors, of course. They were Jonah's associates, carefully briefed and ready to play their parts in our elaborate trap. As I scanned their faces, I caught sight of a familiar figure striding confidently into the room. Griffin had arrived. He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head, calculating his next move. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, his trademark charm emerged full force. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, flashing his million-dollar smile, "I can't tell you how excited I am to present this incredible opportunity." I watched in silent amazement as Griffin launched into his pitch. He spoke of revolutionary green energy technology, of projected profits that would make everyone in the room millionaires within a year. His charisma was undeniable, his words weaving a tapestry of dreams and possibilities. But I knew the truth that lay beneath the glittering facade. As Griffin reached the crescendo of his presentation, he pulled out a stack of documents with a flourish. "And here," he declared triumphantly, "are the patents and financial projections that prove everything I've been saying." This was the moment we'd been waiting for. I caught Jonah's eye, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. "May I see those, Griffin?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. His smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Of course, dear sister-in-law. I'm surprised to see you here, but I'm sure you'll be as impressed as everyone else." As I took the documents, I could feel the weight of every eye in the room upon me. Slowly, deliberately, I began to leaf through the pages. "These are very impressive, Griffin," I said, my tone neutral. "But I have to ask, are they real?" The room fell silent. Griffin's charm evaporated, replaced by a look of barely concealed panic. "What are you implying, Avery?" I stood up, my resolve strengthening with each passing second. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. These documents are forgeries, just like the will you planted in Ethan's study." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Griffin's face contorted with rage. "You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," I interrupted, nodding to Jonah. He stepped forward, distributing folders to everyone at the table. "In these folders, you'll find evidence of Griffin's fraudulent activities spanning the last decade. Fake companies, embezzled funds, and a trail of deceived investors left in his wake." As the assembled group pored over the damning evidence, Griffin's composure crumbled entirely. "You set me up," he snarled, lunging towards me. But Jonah was faster. He intercepted Griffin, restraining him as two uniformed police officers entered the room. "Griffin Collins," one of the officers announced, "you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted extortion." As they led Griffin away in handcuffs, his eyes locked with mine. The anger had faded, replaced by something I never thought I'd see in my brother-in-law's gaze: defeat. "Why, Avery," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "why go to all this trouble?" I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "Because it's what Ethan would have wanted. He always believed there was good in you, Griffin. Maybe it's time you started believing it too." As the door closed behind Griffin and the officers, a heavy silence fell over the room. I turned to face the assembled group, my chin held high. "I want to thank you all for your part in this," I said. "What you've witnessed today is the end of a long and painful chapter. But it's also the beginning of something new, a chance to honor Ethan's memory by using his legacy for good." As I outlined my plans for a charitable foundation in Ethan's name, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The storm had passed, and though the road ahead might be challenging, I was ready to face it, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make Ethan proud. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and curious onlookers as I made my way inside. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Today was the day Griffin would face the consequences of his actions. As I entered the courtroom, I caught sight of him sitting at the defendant's table. Gone was the confident charm, replaced by a haggard, defeated look. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, before he quickly looked away. Jonah squeezed my arm reassuringly as we took our seats. "Are you ready for this?" he whispered. I nodded, steeling myself for what was to come. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. What followed was a damning litany of Griffin's crimes. The prosecutor methodically laid out each fraudulent scheme, each betrayed investor, each forged document. With each new revelation, I could see Griffin shrinking further into himself. When it came time for victim impact statements, I was surprised to see familiar faces from our community step forward. Tom from the hardware store, Sarah from my book club, even Mrs. Hendricks. All had fallen prey to Griffin's charm and deceit at some point. Their stories were heartbreaking. Life savings lost, dreams shattered, trust betrayed. As I listened, I felt a mix of anger and pity for Griffin. How had he strayed so far from the brother Ethan had always believed in? Finally, it was my turn to speak. As I approached the stand, I caught Griffin's eye. The mask of indifference he'd worn throughout the trial cracked, revealing a vulnerability I'd never seen before. I took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor, I'm not here today to condemn Griffin Collins. I'm here to speak for someone who can't be here, my late husband, Ethan. Ethan always believed in the goodness of his brother, even when evidence suggested otherwise. He believed in second chances and the power of redemption." I paused, gathering my thoughts. What Griffin has done is inexcusable. He's hurt people, destroyed lives, and betrayed the trust of those who cared for him. But I believe that somewhere beneath all that greed and deception is the brother Ethan loved. The man who has the potential to make amends and become something better. Turning to face Griffin directly, I continued. "That's why I'm offering you a choice, Griffin. I'm willing to drop the charges against you, on two conditions. First, you must make a public apology and commit to paying back every person you've defrauded, to the best of your ability. Second, you agree to seek professional help to address the root of your unethical behavior." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Griffin's eyes widened in disbelief. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "Mrs. Collins, are you certain about this?" I nodded firmly. "I am, Your Honor. I believe this path offers the best chance for true justice and rehabilitation." All eyes turned to Griffin. For a long moment, he sat frozen, conflict evident on his face. Then slowly he stood. I accept," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, "I accept Avery's offer. And I'm sorry. To everyone I've hurt, to Avery, to Ethan. I'm so sorry." As Griffin began to detail his crimes and offer his apology to the court and his victims, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. There would be a long road of restitution and rehabilitation ahead. But it was a start. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. I stood before the microphones, Jonah by my side, and addressed the crowd. Today marks the end of a painful chapter, but also the beginning of a new one. The Ethan Collins Foundation will work to support those affected by financial fraud and to promote ethical business practices. We believe in second chances and the power of community to heal and grow stronger together. As the cameras flashed and questions flew, I caught sight of Griffin being led away by his lawyer. Our eyes met one last time, and I saw a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in years: hope. The battle was over, but the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt truly ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The grand opening of the Ethan Collins Community Center was a day I'd dreamed of for months. Yet nothing could have prepared me for the overwhelming emotions as I stood before the gathered crowd. The autumn sun warmed my face as I looked out at the sea of familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and even a few former skeptics who had come around in the wake of Griffin's exposure. Today, I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. We're not just opening a building. We're opening a new chapter for our community, one built on the foundation of trust, compassion, and second chances that Ethan always believed in. As I spoke about the center's programs, financial literacy classes, support groups for fraud victims, mentorship opportunities for at-risk youth, I could almost feel Ethan's presence beside me, his quiet pride radiating through the crisp fall air. After the ribbon cutting, I mingled with the crowd, accepting congratulations and heartfelt apologies in equal measure. Tom from the hardware store approached, his eyes downcast. "Avery, I can't tell you how sorry I am for doubting you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I squeezed his arm gently. "What matters is that we're here now, Tom. Together." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself drawn to a quiet corner of the center's garden. A simple bench sat beneath an old oak tree, Ethan's favorite spot for contemplation. I sank onto it, feeling the weight of the past year settling on my shoulders. "I did it, Ethan," I whispered to the wind. "I protected your legacy, just like I promised. And you did a damn fine job of it, too." I startled at the familiar voice, turning to find Jonah approaching with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed me one as he sat beside me. "Thank you, Jonah, for everything," I said, the words feeling inadequate for the depth of my gratitude. He shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "You did all the heavy lifting, Avery. I just provided the legal muscle." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee and watching the last of the day's visitors trickle out of the center. "Have you heard from Griffin?" Jonah asked softly. I nodded. "He's sticking to the program. Weekly therapy sessions, volunteering at the center's financial literacy classes. It's not easy for him, but he's trying." Jonah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "And how do you feel about that?" I considered the question carefully. "Hopeful," I finally said. "Cautiously hopeful. Ethan always believed there was good in Griffin. Maybe he was right all along." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey had been long and painful, filled with betrayal and heartache. But it had also shown me the strength I possessed, the unwavering support of true friends, and the power of a community united. Standing up, I took one last look at the center, at Ethan's legacy made tangible. "Come on," I said to Jonah, a smile tugging at my lips. "We've got work to do." As we walked back towards the building, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. The battle to protect Ethan's estate was over, but the real work, the work of healing, growing, and building a better future, was just beginning. And for the first time since Ethan's passing, I felt truly ready to embrace that future. Not just as Ethan's widow, but as Avery Collins, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to make a difference. The center's lights flickered on as dusk fell, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. And as I stepped through its doors, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that Ethan would be proud. Not just of what I'd accomplished, but of who I'd become in the process. This wasn't an ending, I realized. It was a beginning, a new chapter in a story that was far from over. And I couldn't wait to see where it would lead.